Hi, hello, Vanakkam, and welcome back to yet another episode on your favorite Little's Law YouTube channel. So, today in this video, we are going to see about the goals of different performance tests, and this will definitely help you during your interviews and, in fact, even during your performance testing as well. Because by understanding this, you will know what is the test type and what is the goal and what is the purpose of each of these test types. So now let's go to the video and the first test type. I mean, before we go on to look into the different types of performance testing, their goals. So mainly the performance testing has a range of tests. We all know we have load test, we have stress, spike, volume. So all these tests have runs with a specific objective to ensure an application's robustness. I mean, like we have to check how does the application how robust the application is, or how reliability the application is, or how do they perform under various conditions. So now we will see each and every test, their goals and then their purpose. So the first one is the load test. So what is the goal of the load test? Why do we need to run a load test? So to determine how an application performs under a specific load, typically the peak user load it can handle. So the goal is to test the application under a peak load and to check how does it handle, or how does it performs, or how does the application performs under a specified load. So what is the purpose of running this load test? So to ensure the application can maintain acceptable performance levels under maximum expected usage, and that's the purpose of the load test. So now moving on to the second test type, which is the stress test. So what's the goal of a stress test? So the goal of the stress test is to evaluate how the application behaves under extreme conditions, which is often beyond its anticipated peak load. And here you can see the difference between the load test and the stress test. So this load test runs, the load test will be tested under specified load, but the stress test will be tested under extreme conditions, which is beyond its anticipated peak load. But the load test will be executed under the peak user load, but this will be executed beyond the anticipated peak load, and that's the difference between the load test and the stress test. So what's the purpose of the stress test? So the purpose of it, the stress test, is to identify the breaking point of the application and understand its capacity limits, right? So that's the purpose of the stress test, to understand the breaking point of the application and to understand its capacity limits. And what does it help, like why do we need to run this? So the stress test helps in ensuring the system can handle unexpected spikes and recover gracefully from failure. So that is the purpose of running the stress test. And moving on to the third one, which is the soak test. So the goal of the soak test, or the endurance test in other words, is to identify any issues like memory leaks or any performance degradation over an extended period under a typical load, right? Because this memory leak issue cannot be found during your load test or your stress test. So this memory leak or any performance degradation can be found only when you run a soak test or an endurance test. So soak is SOAK, soak test. So what's the purpose of running this soak test? So the purpose is to ensure that the application remains stable and maintains performance over time, which prevents issues that could arise from a prolonged use. So if the application is being used for a long time, during that particular scenario or during that particular behavior, we must understand that whether the application remains stable and they maintain their performance over that particular duration of time. So that's the reason we run the soak test. And now moving on to the fourth one, which is the spike test. So what's the goal of the spike test? So the goal is to determine the application's performance when subjected to a sudden increase or extreme increase in load. So this is not something like uh, a load test or a stress test. So this is something it's quite different, because we are going to introduce sudden or extreme increase in load. And what's the purpose of testing it? So by introducing or by subjecting sudden or extreme users, we can assess how well the applications handle unexpected surges or unexpected increase in user activity and ensure it can scale up quickly without crashing. And that's the main motto or main reason we are doing this spike test. So sudden increase. So there are like several scenarios where you might be expecting sudden users increase into your application. So to just evaluate how do they perform during this spike, the user spike. So we do the spike testing. And moving on to the fifth one, which is the breakpoint test. So what's the goal of this breakpoint test? So the goal is to identify the maximum load an application can handle before it fails or it becomes or its performance becomes unacceptable. So that is the reason we do this breakpoint test. So again, let me reiterate. So the goal of the breakpoint test is to identify the maximum load an application can handle before it fails or its performance becomes unacceptable. So this is to find the maximum load an application can handle. And what's the purpose of doing this breakpoint test? So the purpose is to determine the absolute limit of the application's performance and helping to set realistic capacity planning and scaling strategy. So we can tell the clients of the business that, see, this is the maximum load the application can handle. So you have or you must limit or you can extend or you can scale your system based on this load. So you can set up the scaling strategy or you can even set up the realistic capacity planning. That can be possible only through your breakpoint test. And moving on to the sixth one, which is the step up test. So what is this step up test is all about? So the goal is to evaluate the application's performance under progressively increasing loads during the same test session. And what is the purpose? So the purpose is to understand how performance metrics like the response times, the throughput, the resource utilization, uh, changes as the load increases, and also it helps to identify any potential bottlenecks. So the main purpose is to understand how the metrics like response times, the throughput, and the resource utilization changes as the load keeps on increasing or as the load increases. So that's the step up test. So every time when the load gets progressively increasing or it's in the increasing mode, every time we should monitor the metrics like the response times or the throughput or the resource utilization to see how does it increases or how does these metrics increases when the load is increasing. So when there is like 100 users, what is the response times and what is the throughput and what is the resource utilization? And when it increases to 200, we have to monitor the same, and when it increases to 300, so same way we have to keep on monitoring it every time when the load gets increased, right? So that is the step up test. So it's very basic, like stepping up is something like we are going to step up the load. And moving on to the seventh one, which is the volume testing. So when it comes to volume test, the goal is to specifically test the application's performance when handling large volumes of data. So this is mainly into handling large volumes of data, and the purpose is to ensure that the batch processes or any data heavy operations can be completed efficiently without impacting the performance. And that's the goal and the purpose of doing the volume testing. And moving on to the eighth one, which is the failover test. This is going to be the last one, and this is going to be the eighth test type and its goal. So the goal is to assess the application's ability to maintain operations when one or more components fail, and the purpose is to ensure that the system can recover gracefully from failures, maintaining availability and minimizing downtime by effectively utilizing backup systems or nodes. And that is the purpose of the failover test. So each of these tests serves a unique purpose in the performance testing process, and it helps us to build a comprehensive understanding of how an application behaves under various conditions and ensuring it meets the necessary performance standards. So with that, I come to an end, and I believe this video will be very useful to you. So please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos like this, and give a like, give a thumbs up, and share the video with your friends. And until I meet you in our next video, it's bye bye from Mr. Shanmugam and your favorite Little Salah YouTube channel. Bye bye.